I was talking to Vera Huffman a while ago, and she said that Vera Holly fell at the nursing home, but it didn't really hurt her. You know, but we're thankful for that. I mean, it just bruised her a little bit, but it really didn't, hurt her bad, as a lot of times it can when they're that age. So we're thankful for that. And let's keep one another in our prayers. Keep the rest of the members in our prayers, the ones that aren't here, that God will watch over them this week. As you turn to the 11th chapter of Hebrews, and the subject is faith, and it lists the heroes of faith. Anytime the Holy Spirit has a writer pen something in the Bible, there's a purpose for it. God didn't decide that the Bible needs to be so many pages long and so just fill in a bunch of stuff. In fact, it was always amazing to me when the Bible was written. There's so many things that were added that I wouldn't have added, because to me they're insignificant. I don't see any point in them being in there. But there are other things that I feel like that would be very important, very significant, God chose to leave out. For instance, when did Jesus' stepdad die? Joseph. Isn't that amazing? As important a man as Joseph was, it doesn't say anything about his death. What about his mother? Nothing was said about the death of Mary. But yet there's so many things that seemingly are insignificant. But they aren't insignificant because God wanted them put in there. So there's a reason for that. Now, the Bible doesn't have everything in it that you need to know. But it has everything that you need to know as pertaining to eternal life and godliness. In other words, it doesn't tell us all about science, but it tells us all that we need to know, and what it doesn't tell us, then we trust God for. And that's where faith comes in. There was something that I would like to read to you. Hold your place in Hebrews. I just want to read you a verse out of Galatians, the 3rd chapter. It says, "Know ye therefore that they which are of faith, the same are the children of Abraham." Those that are of faith are the children of Abraham. All right, now we've been studying the Hebrews of faith, and it says that the faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, for by faith, the elders obtained a good report. In other words, they were approved by God because of faith. And the first thing that faith shows us is how to worship. Abel offered a more excellent sacrifice, or offered a blood sacrifice. Now, hold that just a minute, because there was something that I wanted to do before I got into that. Turn, if you will, to the 12th chapter of Hebrews, verse 1. Notice verse 1, it says, "Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us." Now, what is this cloud of witnesses? Is he talking about angels? Is he talking about departed spirits? No, what he's talking about here is the heroes of faith. Their life is a witness. You see, someone might say, well, we're living in very bad times, and we're living in a time of apostasy. We're living in a time where they do not preach the blood as the only means of salvation, and because of peer pressure, I can't preach that either. Well, yes, you can, because Abel, you see, is a witness that the blood is the only way. Or we might live in very bad times, and I'm always hearing today of the peer pressure that the children are going through in school. You just can't live a godly life nowadays because of all the peer pressure. Well, you go to work even as an adult, and there's just so much peer pressure, and there's so much against you. You just can't live a godly life. Yes, you can. And one of the witnesses, Enoch. Enoch lived in a horrible time, a very ungodly time, but yet he walked with God. And you know that you really can't walk by faith nowadays. Because, first of all, you're going to look like an idiot if you just do what God tells you to do. I mean, you've got to fit in with the world. No, Noah didn't fit in with the world. He is a witness that we are to go against anything but what God tells us to do. No matter what the world thinks about it. No matter what your family thinks about it. No matter peer pressure, whatever. If God tells you to do something, then you obey God. But notice something. And these were godly men, and these were men of faith. But it didn't say that all those of faith are the children of Noah, or the children of Abel, or the children of Enoch, but they're the children of Abraham. Why is that? Because Abraham is a prototype of the Christian faith. He's a prototype. You see, the faith of Abel, the faith of Noah, and the faith of Enoch is partial faith. It just shows us one aspect of faith that they exercised. But you see, Abraham shows us the whole gamut of faith. First of all, there is the pilgrimage of faith. Second, there is the patience of faith. Third, there is the power of faith. Fourth, there is the positiveness of faith. And then fifth, there is the proof of faith. And that covers our life. You see, the Christian has all aspects of that faith. Every one of those aspects of faith. That's the reason those that are saved are the children of Abraham. And we're going to see how he had all of those aspects of faith. First, the pilgrimage of faith. By faith, Abraham, this is verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out not knowing whither he went. Now, first of all, keep in mind, Abraham lived in Ur. Joshua, I want to read what Joshua said about it. I'll just flip over there and read this very quickly. Joshua speaking to Israel, and Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, and called for the elders of Israel, and for their heads, and for their judges, and for their officers, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said unto all the people, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nachor, and they served other gods. So we know that God called Abraham out of idolatry. He was a pilgrim. Now this is amazing. There Abraham had lived all of his life. There was his family. There was his religion. There was all his possessions and all that he had. But God said, Abraham, get up. Leave your family. Leave your hometown. Leave everything you've got. And just come and follow me. I'm going to take you to a land that I'm going to give you. Now keep in mind, Abraham didn't know where he was going. God didn't promise him where he was going. God didn't say, here's where I'm going to take you. It was strictly a pilgrimage of faith. He simply believed God and he began a pilgrimage. Would that be hard to do? Leave where you were born, raised, all of your family, all of your friends, your home, everything, just because God said, Abraham, get up and get out and follow me. I'm not even going to tell you where we're going. You just follow me. That's the pilgrimage of faith. What does the Christian do? When the Christian is saved, he begins a pilgrimage of faith. What does God say when you're saved? Come out from among the unclean thing, doesn't he? Isn't a Christian commanded and demanded to turn his back even on family? If a man doesn't hate his father and mother and brethren, for my sake, he's not worthy of me. If it means giving up your best friends, don't we have to do it? See, it's leaving the former life. It's leaving the world behind. Saving faith begins with the pilgrimage of faith. How many have ever read the book John Bunyan, or Pilgrim's Progress? Wasn't that amazing? It was an allegory. And this man named Christian lived in this worldly city, the city of destruction. And he heard a man named Evangelist. And as soon as he heard the man named Evangelist speak, he had a burden on his back. And he went everywhere trying to find out how to get rid of this burden on his back. And his wife would say, oh, don't worry about it. And his family, his kids, and his neighbors say, oh, don't get upset. Just don't worry about it, and blah, blah, blah. Went on and on and on and on. But he had to leave. He said, I've got to leave. And then it goes on to tell about all of the trials and things that he went through leaving the city of despair. But he became a pilgrim. That's the first thing God demands, is that you become a pilgrim, that you leave your world behind, that you leave your life behind. You see, things you once loved, you'll now hate, and things you once hate, you'll now love. It's a calling out of the world. It's a calling out of the things of the world to follow God. And now notice this. He just got up and left. He didn't know where he was going. God just told him, said, get up, now I'm going to give you an inheritance. By faith, now notice this is the second aspect of it. There's the pilgrimage, and then the faith of patience. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tents. That's tabernacles. It's tents. With Isaac, let's see, I lost my place. And Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Now listen, he was a very patient man. See, God gave him a promise. He said, Abraham, get up and get out. Leave your family, leave your friends, leave your religion, leave everything. I'm going to give you a land. But do you know what? Abraham lived with his children in tents, not houses. Abraham never built a city. He never built a permanent house. He was a stranger and a foreigner or a pilgrim in the land that God had given him, but yet never possessed that land. Even though he lived in the land, he did not possess the land. He had nothing but a promise. And he had to wait. And he had to wait. And he had to wait. And he lived in tents. And he moved. And then his sons were born. They lived in tents. Abraham, all of his life, never possessed that land. But it says he died in faith, not receiving the promise. Now that shows the patience of Abraham. Now, let me put it this way. Now, if every one of us knew for a certainty that on the 6th of October, Christ was returning. I mean, we don't know that. And I certainly wouldn't tell you that. But I'm saying, what if we knew for certainty that 1 month from today, the 6th of October, the trumpets were going to sound. Christ was coming with his host of angels. We were going to be raptured out. Now, I'll tell you, folks, if I knew that, it would be very, very easy for me to live a very, very godly life for 30 days. Not a one of us would go back to our job. We would spend all of our time in prayer, in Bible study, in witnessing, doing all that we could to please God. Is that true? See, anybody could do that for 30 days if we knew. But we don't know. But we're to live every day just as if he were coming today. Now, Abraham lived his entire life without receiving the promise. But he had patience. The patience of faith. He never did say, God, I'm giving up on you. Well, I've been here 40 years. You haven't given it to me yet. I'm tired of all of this waiting. How long do I have to wait? He never did. He never did mumble. He never did grumble. But you see, God gave him an earthly land, the Canaan land. But that's not what really Abraham wanted. He said, I'm looking for a city whose architect and builder is God. I'm looking for a city that hath foundations, Not like this. Now he knew that God was going to give him the land. How did he know? Because God told him he was. He had faith in God. But he knew that he was a pilgrim. He was hated. He was in suspicion of every neighbor, everyone around. He was traveling like a pilgrim through a foreign land, a hostile land, although he owned the land. But it wasn't given to him yet. But he patiently waited, knowing that God would bring his promise to pass. Notice, by faith he sojourned in the land of promise. In the land of promise. It was his land, because God promised it to him. But he sojourned as in a strange country. Notice, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. The patience of faith. Listen, folks. Do you know why? Guess what? The Lord did not come since last Sunday. I've been saved since I was 9 years old, and God ain't come yet. Wayne, how long have you been saved? Long time? Sharon? How old are you, Chubby? 64. Now, I know how long the doc was saved. He hadn't been saved very long. But, Kathy? How long have you been saved? A.B.? 46 years. Now, guess something. In all that 46 years, the Lord hadn't come yet. Now, the reason you got saved because you got a heavenly kingdom, don't you? And you want to go to that kingdom, right? You ain't gone. He ain't come. You keep coming to church. You keep studying. You keep praying. You keep witnessing. Why? That's the patience of faith. The same kind of faith Abraham had. We don't give up. Why? Because we have the same kind of faith Abraham had. Those that have the same kind of faith Abraham had are what? The children of Abraham. He is a perfect type of saving faith. Now, look at the power of faith. Through faith, also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Now, you talk about patience. See, God promised Abraham and Sarah a son. But boy, it was, you think, now, Wayne, if you was 40 years old, and your wife was 38 years old, and God promised you a son, you'd think, well, it's got to be right away now, wouldn't you? I mean, we're not spring chickens. Probably born about this time next year at least, by then. But what if it went on another 40 years? Another 50 years? Man, you'd begin to think, wait a minute. But guess what? Even when Abraham was old, Sarah was barren, never was able to have any children. And God promised Abraham a son. And you know what it said Abraham's response to that was? It said that Abraham staggered not in unbelief. Isn't it amazing? I don't care what science comes up with. I don't care. They can bring on the heavy guns. I don't care what kind of proof they have that we're evolved from apes. It don't shake the Christian, does it? It don't shake the Christian, because we know where we came from. And I've read books, or I've seen books where they try to prove that Jesus really wasn't the Christ. And all that doesn't affect the Christian. I've never personally met him. I've never seen Jesus Christ but with my eyes. I've never heard him speak. I've never met one of the apostles. I've never met one of the prophets that prophesied that he would come. I wasn't there when he was crucified. I wasn't there when he was resurrected. None of those things. But I know he lives. I know he did live. I know he died. I know he rose from the dead. I know all those things by faith. And we patiently wait for his return. See, that's the same kind of faith Abraham had. Now, Abraham knew he was going to have a son. He patiently waited. Sarah wasn't that patient. She finally gave up and said, well, you know, here's Hagar, my handmaid. Won't you have a son by her? Boy, what a mistake that was. What a mistake that was. They did. And as a result of it, see, Ishmael was the father of the Arab nations. And from that day since, the Arabs have constantly warred with the Jews because of her lack of faith. Because of that lack of faith. But the power of faith, even though he was 100 years old, even though Sarah was 99 and had never been able to conceive, because of their faith had power, and she did conceive and bore a son. That's the power of faith. Listen, folks, faith can move mountains. You know, isn't it amazing? Someone has a bad cold and we'll pray for them. And we'll believe that God's going to heal them, don't we? Or if it's something simple. But if somebody has cancer, it's kind of like, oh, well, that's beyond, that's just too bad. Isn't that amazing? Is God limited? Did you know that God could cure a terminal cancer, if it's in his will, as easily as he could a sniffle? That means nothing to God. Boy, I'll tell you what, I just have to keep thinking of Kathy. When she went and ran tests, they found she had a cancer in your throat, wasn't it? And what was it, like 5 tumors in your liver? It's on both sides of her liver. I mean, it was like curtains. But I remember the men of the church got on their knees and we prayed for Kathy. How many years has that been now, Kathy? 6 years. That's before her first little granddaughter was born. And I believe she's going to live to not only raise the granddaughters, but you'll probably have to raise the grandchildren. See, God, the power of faith. And God gave him the power and Sarah the power to conceive because of faith. Then there is the positiveness of faith. Look at verse 13. These all died in faith. What all is he talking about? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. How did they see them afar off? By faith. How do I know that Jesus lives? By faith. How do I know, Brother Wayne, that there's a city with streets of gold, gates of pearl, and foundations of precious gems? By faith. Do you know what? That city could not be any more real if it was brought down here and I can see it. Folks, it's real. I've never seen it, but I've seen it afar off by faith. And I'm here to tell you it does exist. And though these men did not possess that land, see, they knew it was theirs. It was money in the bank. They saw it afar off. That was their faith in God. They believed it. You see, let me tell you something. My mom and my dad died not living to see the rapture. Many, many people that went to this church for years and years ago have all died awaiting the rapture. Does that mean the rapture will never occur? Because they didn't come in their lifetime? No. And you know what? I believe when those people died, they died knowing the rapture would occur. They knew God would come with a shout, the trumpet would sound, the graves would open, and they'd be resurrected. There was no doubt in their mind. That's the faith of Abraham. That was the faith of Isaac and Jacob. Oh, they didn't receive it. They didn't live to see that great nation of Israel as it inhabited and possessed the land, and it was theirs. But they all died in faith, seeing it afar off, knowing that God would bring it to pass. And were persuaded of them. In other words, they knew it. They knew that God was going to give their children the land, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. In other words, if I tell you that I'm a pilgrim, well, what else is that telling you? That there's a place waiting for me I call home. Isn't that right? So when they say, look, we're just strangers and pilgrims here, that means if you're a pilgrim, that means you have a homeland somewhere. And they knew that they had a homeland somewhere. And they also knew that God was going to give that land to their children for a possession. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from which they came out, in other words, if they hadn't had faith, they might have had opportunity to have returned. And do you know, I think that's what happens to a lot of people, Brother Wayne, that's not really saved. They come forward, they make a profession, and they come just hoping it's true, wishing it was true. And I'll tell you what, in a little while, they think back of the world, and they think, well, what if this isn't true? I don't want to give all this up if this isn't true. One time, my dad, years and years ago in Grove, Oklahoma, the government was giving away land. And the government would give you, I think it was like 5 acres, and then you had a certain amount of time to make an improvement on that. And you had to live on that land so long, then the government would deed that to you. I don't know how long you had to live. But anyway, my dad was noticing this land that the government had given to whoever wanted to homestead it, and there was nothing there but just tar paper shacks. Nobody was building anything of any consequence on it. It was just tar paper shacks. And he asked my uncle, he said, well, how come nobody builds anything on this land but tar paper shacks? And my uncle said, well, they build just the bare minimum in case the government changes their mind and takes the land away from them. Well, that's the way professors do. I'm not going to do any more than I have to. I'm really not going to turn loose to the world because I don't want to lose the world in this too if this isn't real. See, they're mindful of it, so it's easy to go back. It's easy to just give this up and go right back because they're not really persuaded of these things. They've not really seen them things by faith. It's not real to them. So it's easy then just to go back into the world. It's easy to believe the old beer commercial. Get all the gusto you can because you just go around one time. And that's the way the world is, isn't it? Just get all out of life you can because this is all there is. And so they come to church hoping there's more, but since they're not really sure, they look back and they say, wait a minute, I've given up all my friends and I've given up all of my hobbies, I've given up my parties, and no, this may not be real, and I know that's real, so I'm going back. But now they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. Now notice something, folks. All we really have is what? All we have is a promise that God has given you eternal life. All you have is a promise. When he went away, he said, I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again to receive you, that where I am, ye may be also. That's all we have is a promise. What if he didn't want to do it? We can't hold a gun to his head. He's God. See? Not a one of us has God said, okay, now look, Chubby, now I've saved you, and to prove it, I'm going to take you to heaven, and I'm going to let you walk around, and you can stay up there 6 months, and you look it all over and see how you like it, and then I'm going to bring you back, and that way you'll know it's real. He didn't do that. He didn't do that, and He won't do that. We're saved by faith. We know it's real, but by faith. And because we have that kind of faith, it says that God is not ashamed to be called our God, for He had prepared for them a city. Now look at the power of faith. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up, I don't mean the power of faith, I mean the proof of faith. The proof of faith. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. And he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. Boy, that'd take faith. See, that's the proof of faith. That he had one son that God had promised him. That he'd wait for years and years and years and finally got that one son. Then God says, Abraham, take him up there on the mountain and put a knife in his heart. Boy, now that takes faith, doesn't it? And you know what he was thinking? Now, wait a minute. God wants me to take him up there and slay him. But since God promised that the whole world would be blessed through Isaac, then I know that God will raise him from the dead. Now, that's faith, isn't it? That's proof that he had faith. Okay, now, he received him as a like figure. See, what does that mean? Isaac was good as dead. Abraham, there was no hesitation. He drew the knife back. He was ready to plunge the knife. But God sent an angel to stop him. See, but because God saw Abraham's heart, he knew he was going to do it. So he stopped him. So he received, untied Isaac, brought him up off of that pile of wood that would be lit and when he would be burned. He received him just as if he had been raised from the dead. That's the proof of faith. That is the reason that Abraham, not Noah, not Enoch, not Abel, not David, not Samson, none of those is the perfect type of salvation. That's the reason Abraham, those of like faith are the children of Abraham. And what that really means is those that are saved have exactly the same kind of faith that Abraham had. Now keep this in mind. We may not have it to that extent, but we have the same kind. You see, some people have more faith than other people. That's obvious, isn't that right? But we have the same kind of faith. For instance, Isaac didn't have a whole lot of faith, but he had faith. And he had the same kind of faith that his daddy did, Abraham. Now look at these other two and then I'll close. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel and gave commandment concerning his bones. Boy, now listen. That's dying faith, isn't it? Now you think about this. Isaac, when he got ready to die, he blessed Jacob and Esau, and all he could leave them, folks, is what? A promise. And he passed that promise on and said, God is going to make a great nation out of you boys. And then it was passed on. Look at Joseph. It was hundreds of years. The children of Israel would be in Egypt for hundreds of years before God would take them out of Egypt. Now, you know what? If he didn't really believe in God, he wouldn't care what they did with his bones, would he? But Joseph was so convinced that God would bring that nation out of Egypt and deliver them into their own land. He said, now when you leave here, take my bones with you and plant them in the Canaan land. That's faith, isn't it? It showed that he really believed the promises. And all I can pass on to my children are the promises. I can't assure you he'll come in your lifetime, but I can certainly, when it's time for me to go, to pass the promises on to you, then you pass them on to your children, and then to their children and their children. Why? Because God is faithful that promised. I don't know when he's coming, but I know he's coming. And I know the day is going to come when he'll come with a shout. The trumpet's going to sound. And I don't know whether it's going to be 100 years, 1,000 years, or 10,000 years. But I know someday, and I can tell my grandchildren, he's coming again. The graves are going to open. And we're going to that city that Abraham was looking towards, that hath foundations, whose builders, maker is God. That's the faith of Abraham. And all of those that have like faith are what? Children of Abraham. And guess what? All of those that have that faith, God is not ashamed to call them his children. And he prepares a city for them. For people that have served God all their life. All of their life. Like the old song, take the world but give me Jesus. They forsook the world. They've gone through trials and heartaches, done without to serve Jesus. Died maybe in a shack, maybe even died alone. But they died in faith, knowing that one day there's going to be a resurrection. That's the faith of Abraham. Not receiving the promises. They didn't experience the rapture while they were alive. They never saw heaven with their eye. But they knew it was real. Why? They saw it afar off by faith. And that's the reason you're here tonight, folks. That's the reason you keep on keeping on. That's the reason you keep coming. Nothing's changed since Sunday. You just keep coming. Why? Because God called you out. And you have the patience. Because you know God has the power. And we had the promise. Let's stand. Let's sing Amazing Grace.